The Field of 68 Media Network presents Red is the New Orange, a Syracuse basketball podcast.
Vince intercepts a pass, breakaway for the freshman guard, he flies and slams! Aerial assault from Judah Mintz.
Looking to go back door to Bell, they get it to a near corner three, knocks it down! Chris Bell, the sharpshooter.
Bringing you everything you need to know out of the 315.
Up top, Williams surges ahead, up with the right hand and in. A pretty up and under move from Benny Williams to beat his man.
Over to Taylor, he skips into the lane, puts up a floater, it drops in.
Let's get it started with your hosts, Ian Unsworth and Johnny Gadamowitz.
Well, we finally got to see the Syracuse team we've all been waiting for. Just 9 games into the season. Welcome into Red is the New Orange. Ian Unsworth, Johnny Gadamowitz. As always, we've got a special guest coming later on in the pod to talk Georgetown. So obviously a big game. Not something you want to miss because we've got someone who's talked to Ed Cooley exclusively, one-on-one inside conversation. So we will get the most inside of scoops you can possibly ask for on the Georgetown Hoyas. But first, Johnny, 102-85 over UAlbany, on Tuesday. A win that after the first 5 or 6 minutes never felt in jeopardy. And even without J.J. Starling, I'm sitting there watching the second half and I'm like, where has this team been all season? Because this looks like Syracuse basketball of the past.
Yeah, the offense was humming, 47 in the first, 55 in the second. As much as you would have liked down the stretch for it to get to a 20-point cushion, 25-point cushion, and really just flex your muscles, today's not a day to get too nitpicky. It's a 17-point win. You put up over 100 points in a game where you don't have your best offensive player. And this was a game that, to be quite frank, Ian, a lot of guys from an individual standpoint really needed, right? For Donnie Freeman to go out there and have 24, and not just have 24, but look really good on the defensive end too. For Chris Bell to have 18 and get his and get to the line and do it off the dribble and knock down some shots. Like, this was really an all-around effort. And I think this is the formula that you kind of got to follow if you're going to get by without JJ for the next couple weeks.
Yeah, I mean, up and down the floor, up and down the box score, you saw great performances. And I think defensively, it's worth talking about, too, that UAlbany at times really struggled to get the shots they wanted. I mean, they only turned it over 5 times, but they struggled at times to get the looks they wanted because they're smaller. And there were some weird mismatches that we talked about, especially Justin Neely, who took a lot of shots, didn't make a whole lot of shots in the first half. Like, I was wondering how Syracuse would handle those. And it just turned out that Donnie Freeman's bigger, longer, and going to be stronger than a lot of these mid-major opponents. That's what we've been waiting for.
Yeah.
That's what we've been waiting for.
Utilizing the wingspan.
Yeah. The first couple minutes were scary. Right, UAlbany banks a 3 in. I mean, what are you going to do about that? Got out in transition a couple times, but Syracuse buckled down and eventually played the style of basketball that they wanted to play. Offensively, in the first couple minutes, I mean, we might as well just dissect this because there's not a whole lot of negative critique otherwise to throw out. I talked a lot about Lampkin getting the ball and becoming a presence, not necessarily a scoring presence, but a presence, period. Syracuse tried too hard to get it to him in the first few minutes. And Randolph Childress pointed that out on the ESPN2 broadcast and I think made a very subtle but good point, and then repeated it a couple times so you wouldn't miss it, about Lampkin being a better passer than he is scorer. And UAlbany couldn't make Lampkin a scorer. He had 5 assists, 6 boards as well, just 6 points. But in the second half, he was all over the place, creating for others, setting screens for guys on the perimeter. That's the impact he can have on a game. And that's why Syracuse in the second half opened it up to 55 points and got some of those open 3 looks you've been waiting for and got those open 2s, right? Got to the basket as easily as possible.
Yeah, it's not very often you see a guy who's 6'11", 265 with the pure passing ability that Eddie Lampkin possesses. Now, what I will say, I'm not going to push back on it because you're right. And I think Childress was right in his point in that, look, this is a guy who can create. You do still need him to be a dog from a scoring standpoint, too. I think this is one of those games where no knock on the Great Danes, but it is UAlbany, right? If there's a game where you can get away with a really strong offensive performance that lacks Eddie Lampkin getting involved from a scoring standpoint, this is that game. Now, you don't want him to shy away from the setting screens and the kicking it out to the open guard on the wing, but he can't just be that either. And even if it's just for him to be a decoy, right? Like you need him to have that scoring prowess just so that other teams respect it and know it's there and they can't anticipate every time he gets the ball, okay, where is it headed next? But at the same time, he's new. He's new to this system. That's going to come with time. It's all sort of growing here collectively. Really solid performance, all things around. And I like the tenacity of this team, Ian, to get to the free throw line, too. I'm sure you'd agree. They were aggressive on the drive. They were aggressive off the dribble. Even a guy like Jaquan Carlos, who has received his fair share of criticism and not without good reason here through the first couple of weeks, to have the 12 assists and get his in that regard, which he normally does. I think they brought up Doug Sherman and Childress brought up, what was it, the 19 assist game at Hofstra last year on the air that Carlos had. But to get to the line 7 times for a guy who is mostly a passer first, really impressive, and a lot of things that you hope can, again, kind of be built upon moving forward here.
Reminder to follow us on Twitter, F68_Cuse. Give the Field of 68 podcast network and the Field of 68 a follow to stay up to date with everything college basketball. On the topic of Carlos, he never looked rushed. That's the biggest compliment you can give to a point guard, that the game was played at Jaquan Carlos's pace. It wasn't played at anyone else's pace. And yeah, UAlbany's perimeter defenders were not great, right? Smaller guards that got run off a lot of screens, and they switched a decent amount too, which I'm sure helped. But Carlos never looked like he was rushed. 4-to-1 assist to turnover ratio in total control until Red took him out. He played 37 minutes. So he got a good amount of time on the floor. And in the second half, sticking with Carlos, but also touching on your point, Johnny, about it wasn't a 20, 25-point game. There were a lot of mixing of rotations, I think, at the end of the game, right? We saw Davis, Freeman, and Elijah Moore playing together, right? 2 freshmen and then a senior, but at the same time, that's not a combo you really expected all that much because Freeman's starting and those other 2 are coming off the bench, right? There's been a lot of mixing and matching happening because of injuries, because of Eddie Lampkin having the back issues early in the season, all that sort of stuff.
Mastorovich saw some run.
Yeah, and he played well too, brought good energy, forced some turnovers to help SU back into the game when they got down a little early. So the bench unit, even Kyle Cuff was Syracuse's leading scorer in the first half. Right? That sort of energy, that sort of boost that you get can't just be left behind once you get a big old lead. So mixing all those guys in, figuring out where they fit down the stretch is important against a team like UAlbany that did keep its guys in until the final moments.
Absolutely. Keeping the legs fresh and just instilling confidence in a lot of these players like the Mastoroviches, the Kyle Cuffs of the world. Now you got to keep it moving. This was a game that we both said, Ian, Syracuse really needed, right? Coming off the tough Notre Dame loss. And now you get a beatable Georgetown team. We'll have more on that for you coming up in a moment. But like the games on your schedule that are no doubt, hey, we got to go out there and just do us. You have to do that. Like if this was anything closer than what it was, we're probably coming on here and having a very different conversation. But it's one game at a time. You can't win games in January and February when it's only November and December. So take care of what's in front of you. You know, make sure you're checking all your boxes, crossing the T's, dotting the I's, and they did that. And we're not going to get too nitpicky, but we're also going to recognize that, hey, this is an America East program that you took care of business against. We're not going to oversell it either.
Last thing before we move on. I saw some Twitter chatter about the dome and how full it was, or there a lack thereof.
Yep.
Look, it's Tuesday. It's the last week of school for many of these kids. They've got finals, right?
Was this week finals week, or was this last week?
I do believe so. My sister is
half
finishing up some projects. Her roommates have left.
Right.
So a lot of students are not on campus. That plays a big factor. And I mean, look, it's the holiday season. It's a busy time for a lot of people. Regardless, Saturday is going to be full. It is Georgetown. It is going to be full. For the games that really matter, the Dome will be full. That is not a question. It is a constant. So regardless of where the fan support was on Tuesday, don't doubt that it won't be there for the future. And also just keep in mind that what Syracuse has put out against mid-major opponents so far this season wouldn't necessarily inspire me to buy a ticket to the game yet.
Especially on a Tuesday night.
Tuesday will change that. You go to that, you see that Tuesday game on TV, you see 102 points. Oh, I got to go see Donnie Freeman. I don't want to miss this chance to see a future first-round pick. That'll change things. Georgetown will change things. And it's not going to be an empty, bottomless pit going forward.
No. That was a one-off. I think most Orange fans know it was a one-off considering the weekday game, the opponent, the time of the semester. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Ian, but I feel like every week, finals week, this is a talking point, right? Like even when we were there, like, okay, people are going home, people are on vacation, people are studying for tests, what have you. Like there's always that kind of mid-December drop off in attendance a little bit. It'll pick back up. I'm not all too concerned whatsoever.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if the Dome on Saturday is a orange wave when Georgetown comes to town. We're going to take a break here on Red is the New Orange, but we will be back to talk Hoyas with Emmanuel Berbari right after this. We're back on Red is the New Orange. Ian Unsworth, Johnny Gamwitz, and we got a special guest to preview Syracuse and Georgetown. He went to Fordham, of all places, but he knows the Hoyas better than most. It's Emmanuel Berbari here on Red is the New Orange. You've probably heard him on The Fan calling Yankees baseball, and you've probably seen him on FS1 or FS2 this college basketball season. He's all over the Big East. And, E-Man, that's how you're so acquainted with the Hoyas. So thanks for coming on, man. Great to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I didn't know I'd be putting on the Hoyas insider cap, but when you're exposed to a team that much, it's fun to put that cap on.
So Ed Cooley, second year, right? Georgetown's program has been in the dumpster for a long, long time. What are his thoughts on where he's taken steps from year one to year two and how he's bringing them back?
Yeah, he's got a brand new roster and he's got a young roster. And Ed Cooley will stress the fact that they don't have the game experience of most teams. So it's taken them a bit. You'll see the talent on full display, but taking them a bit to gel. So he's trying to get these players up to speed with what he wants, get some of these guys who have either transferred in or are new to the toughness and physicality that it takes to win in the Big East. But he's high on some of these guys. I think he has some of the pillars of the program that you could still see 2-3 years from now when the ultimate vision is seen. And Ed Cooley has Georgetown humming and where he wants it to be. So I don't think it's quite there yet, but they have talent. And I think even though they're probably not playing the exact brand that Ed Cooley wants them to play yet, they've had some success in the early season, and you're going to see flashes of, wow, this team could be a player in a couple of years.
Well, you mentioned some of that early season success, Emmanuel, and the two games that you were on the play-by-play for, Mount St. Mary's and Wagner, both pretty convincing double-digit wins for the Hoyas. From your perspective, anybody really catch your eye of, wow, this is the guy? I mean, obviously you can look at the stats, you can look at the numbers, but from an eye test standpoint, who knocked your socks off the most?
Yeah, so the obvious guys, especially when you watch them, your first impression is Thomas Sorber at face value, freshman big man. He's been incredible early on. Now he's taken a couple said like as any freshman would. So it's not like he's been consistently popping off the screen at you. But what stands out to me is a freshman big. The scoring is there, the rebounding is there. He can do it inside and out, but he's a great passer. So you can set him up in the high post, or you can find him at any spot of the floor, and he's facilitating as much as some of the guards on this Georgetown team. So Sorber, that's an underrated element of the game that makes him a complete player. And I think he's only going to get better and better as he progresses at Georgetown. The other guy who hasn't really found his stride yet is Malik Mack, sophomore, transfer from Harvard, Ivy League Rookie of the Year.
Stud.
He's a guy who the skill set pops out at you. Now, when it all comes together, I think he's going to be a real force in the Big East. I don't think it's all really come to fruition yet, but he'll make plays where your head turns and you're like, whoa, what did I just see? What was that pass that he just fit in the tightest of windows? He's that guy whose skill set really pops out, and the speed pops out as well. Jaden Epps is back from last year, and he was carrying a lot of the load when they were in the doldrums last year and they needed to lean on him for more scoring. I think the scoring will be similar this year, but just in different ways. And there are going to be games where they're really good and he's not as good because they have the luxury of that this season, but he's a real scorer. The X factor here, though, so yeah, you got Epps, you got Mack, and you got Sorber. The X factor is Micah Peavy. And this is his third school. He's coming from the Lone Star State, first non-Texas school that he's been at. His defense is amazing. Ed Cooley calls him a menace. That's what he'll call Micah Peavy. And racks up the steals. It'll show on the stat sheet, but also there are ways where he impacts on defense that you won't find on the stat sheet. He'll be an all Big East type player and defender for that matter. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if he's a defensive player of the year in that conference. But the element of his game that makes him a true X factor is he can put up 20. He can shoot from the outside. He can create his own shot. Sometimes he's not relied on as much for that, but when PB goes, I think this Georgetown team goes. So it's obvious you look at the playmakers like Sorber and Mack and Epps, but I think whether Georgetown is a legitimate force this year in the conference comes down to Micah Peavy.
Well, Peavy and Eddie Lampkin crossed paths at TCU way back when, so that'll be an interesting dynamic. And yeah, man, I agree. He's probably got to take more of a load this year because TCU was a sort of, everyone got a little bit off the plate, but this year there isn't as much talent. I think with Epps, though, we saw him last year have a really inefficient game against Syracuse. He's kind of a chucker. Is he not? 1 of 9 from 3 last year, and he wants to take every single shot he can, especially when he makes the first few. What has Coach Cooley talked about in terms of Epps and how he's grown and maybe taken a step back from being that I have to do everything guy?
I think Ed Cooley thinks he's a better player now for the situation that he's in and has adapted really well. So I think Ed Cooley believes when this vision is realized that Jaden Epps is still going to be that type of scorer, but in a more efficient way and fit into what the nucleus that Georgetown has built. So he's a more mature player for it. And Jaden Epps said it preseason when he was asked about this current Georgetown situation. He said, look, I want to be a part of a winner. I want to win. Like he knows he can score. He knows he can go and get his, but he wants to be part of something bigger and he wants to be known and remembered as a winner. So I think he has the right mentality. Ed Cooley's drilling that into him, and he thinks he's a more complete player for this situation. And Epps and Peavy in particular, different backgrounds, of course. Epps was a Hoya last year, and Peavy's really experienced and coming over from TCU. These guys are really vital because they're the experienced guys. They're the only guys with experience on this team that are in meaningful roles and guys who have played in the NCAA tournament before. Yeah, so if Georgetown wants any degree of success, these guys have to lead as well as score and facilitate. Like they have to show the way for these younger guys who are going to have, Sorber and Mack have to be key players as freshmen. And Mack, of course, is a freshman for Big East standards, but a sophomore overall.
Emmanuel, one of Syracuse's big problems this year to get you up to speed on the Orange has been the lack of a three-point shot. This is a team that last we checked the numbers when we brought it up on our last episode is worse than the 300th best team in the country as far as three-point shooting is concerned. Looking at Georgetown, the games you did, neither of those two did they make more than 7. 7 was the most they made. 7 in one, I think it was 6 in the other. Zooming out, looking at the year as a whole, they're right around 29% from beyond the arc. Is this a team kind of similar to Syracuse that is just not a shooting team, or do they have the potential to be, but the shots just haven't fallen yet for whatever reason?
I think they have the potential to be. Some of that probably comes from they've played inside a lot. Like one of their best players is he's a post player, and he's a guy who can score points inside. Now he can step out too, but that's not really as much his game. So I think that's part of it. I also think they're not necessarily looking for that as much. I saw a lot of their threes would come on kickouts, like Sorber gets collapsed on, and then you have an open look, or Georgetown's been really good on the offensive glass this year. So second chance opportunity, kick it out, and then there's a three. So I could see it becoming more of a part of their identity, and they haven't really hit their stride yet. But it's probably a mix of factors, like one of your leading players, one of your leading scorers is not a guard. And also the fact that like Malik Mack can create his own shot, but is he really creating his own shot into a three all that often? I think they're more of a spot up team and a kick out team when it comes to the perimeter, more so than one of these guys, a complete playmaker. When he makes a play, it's going to be a 3-point basket.
What about the pace? I think that's the other thing that Syracuse fans have kind of been left wondering about this year. Red Autry wants to play fast. Sometimes the team plays fast. Other times the team plays really slow and does okay in the half court. I know Wagner is one of the slowest teams in the country, so you probably got a plodding half court battle there. But has Georgetown shown the ability to get up and down the floor, or do they want to work it inside to Sorber in the half court and develop their offense there?
They do like to develop the half court, but that's something Ed Cooley has stressed as becoming a better transition team. That was one of the key areas of growth he wanted to see in the midst of those games. And I think a lot of that stems from their defense and a guy like Peavy. When they're wreaking havoc defensively, they will get out in transition and they'll get on these extended runs that will define these games and allow them to pull away. So I think that all boils down to their defense being disruptive and then getting out in transition. And then that's when you'll see guys like Sorber, some of the big men, Fielder off the bench, or in the starting lineup for that matter, start to thrive. So, yeah, I think it's an area of improvement they want to have. It really boils down to their defensive approach. And if they can get out in transition and run, they're at their best because they're not like they want to be a good half court team. But if they're just slowing it down in the half court and playing through Sorber, I'm not sure if that's a recipe for winning all that many games in the Big East.
Last one on my end, man. Talking to Emmanuel Berbari, of course, here on Red is the New Orange, Fox Sports play-by-play broadcaster. And part of the benefit of that, Emmanuel, is that you have seen not only Georgetown, but a bevy of Big East schools over the course of this non-conference portion of the schedule. Obviously, Syracuse fans probably still keeping some ties with the Big East, as the Orange, of course, have a deep history there. But I'm curious for you, when you look at this Georgetown squad and we get into the crux of conference play, do you see it being a program that, look, you've done St. John's games, you've done some Providence games, are they going to be able to tread water in the big, bad Big East in your eyes? Or unfortunately, for Cooley's sake, could you see it being another year of kind of going through the motions and continuing to lay that foundation?
Yeah, I wouldn't say going through the motions. Like they want to win, they want to compete, and they know they have pieces to compete, but there are going to be growing pains, I think, with the lack of experience because there have already been growing pains, I think, in the out of conference portion of the schedule. And a lot of these guys are going to go through the Big East gauntlet for the first time. Even a Malik Mack, who's a sophomore, has college experience already, has succeeded at the college level, but not necessarily at this level. Can they surprise and win a few more Big East games than maybe we expect? I think that's very within the realm of possibility, but I don't see it as a Big East force this year. Could they be a year away? I think so, and that should excite the Georgetown fan that is looking at a team that could barely win Big East games as recent as last year, and now maybe next year they could be a Big East contender. I think that's very possible. This year, I don't see them being that much of a contender, but Georgetown that night, and you're a Providence who expected to be in the top 5, maybe the top 4 of the Big East, and you have Georgetown that, like, you cannot sleep on them. So that shows you that they're sort of knocking on that door. I'm not sure if they can work their way into quite contention this year, but hey, some of these teams that haven't necessarily impressed so far this year and want to be Big East contenders, Georgetown could be a real trap game, especially when you're going to a Washington, D.C., you're playing at Capital One Arena. and this isn't a knock on Georgetown. They have a passionate fan base, but you're in a huge NBA style arena, and it's not necessarily the best atmosphere
empty
on that given night. You could have a lot of fans in there, but you're not filling that place. So that could be a weird trap game type of environment for some of these teams. And I think Georgetown could walk its way and compete its way into a couple more Big East wins than we expect.
Yeah, for the Villanovas, I mean, Seton Hall's been terrible
right,
like the year.
Some of these teams go in there.
Butler.
I'm not sure if there's going to be a cakewalk.
Ken Pom projects Georgetown to go 7-13 in conference play. That is a win within itself.
Considering they won, what, 2 games in Big East play all of last year? Yeah.
If Ed Cooley does what he wants to do and some of these guys overperform, they have talent. Like, they have raw talent there from some of these young guys. I could see 7-13 turning into 9-11. Like ceiling 10-10. I mean, Georgetown fans are going to be elated going into next year. So I like the 7-13 projection, but I think you could up that by 2.
Yeah, that'll put you in a really good spot with, as you've said, Emmanuel, a lot of those guys coming back next year. 2 losses for Georgetown on the season, just for context. A 21-point bludgeoning at the hands of Notre Dame. Notre Dame had its best player, Marcus Burton, at that time. And Georgetown just lost to West Virginia last Friday, only committed 5 turnovers and lost by 13 on the road. So who knows what's going to happen in the Dome. I think it's a roll of the dice, all things considered, when it comes to Syracuse and Georgetown. You know it's going to be a good game every year regardless. 2:30 p.m. tip Saturday on the ACC Network. Emmanuel Berbari, again, thank you so much for joining us to talk Hoyas. And honestly, I'm really surprised that we made it through this entire segment without a Soto comment from Johnny over here.
I was thinking about it, but I didn't want to go there. So I'll reserve that for another day.
I appreciate you staying away. You got your prep. By the way, we're recording this about 90 minutes before his press conference. So Johnny has enough time to bask today.
Yeah, Johnny's going to go bask in the orange sunlight, and we'll get you on your way, Emmanuel. Thanks again for taking the time. And as always, follow us on Twitter, F68_Cuse, and check out Emmanuel Berbari. I believe it's at Berbari on air on
Correct.
Twitter. If you want Yankee stuff, he's got it. If you want sports hot takes, he's got it. Listen to him late night and listen to him all season on the Yankees radio network, as well as FS1 and FS2. All right.